Dear friends, it's no secret that Sodor is home to many engines, even before those of the Fat Controllers. 4 examples were once home to what we now know as Edwards branch line, and these are the stories of their days past. The author. An engine's name. Long, long ago, there existed a railway known as the Wellsworth and Suddery. It wasn't too big of a railway, and arguably minuscule in funds. Only 4 tank engines ran the line. Their names were William, Terrier, who preferred Terry for short, Wilfrid, and Treffy. William was the most heated of the fleet, both in temperature and temperament. Under the belief of being named after English Prime Minister William Gladstone, needless to say, the tank engine had a very high opinion of himself, and one day this was tested to an all-time high. "Absolute codswallop!" William burst out one night in the sheds. "Worn rails should be the least of defects to stop an engine of my calibre. I'm named William for a reason. I carry prestige." "Last time I checked, Mr. Squire's son ain't Prime Minister," cut in Terry. "Oh, quit barking and run back to your kennel, Terrier. You don't have the responsibility nor the capability to bear this railway's passenger services." Terry could only roll his eyes through gritted teeth, as he knew William's words would be fruitless to argue with. "The sheer thought of your filth-filled bunker being present with my coaches is nothing short of revolting. With 4 handling the harbour and 3 undertaking the freight duties, what contribution do you offer to the turntable, apart from licking Mr. Squire's—" "I don't need to hear what you're whinging about this time, William," yawned Wilfrid, struggling to keep his eyes open. "Can you at least tell him he's a hornswoggler?" Terry interjected. "Says the one who pants like a pedigree," William began again. "I'm the shining pony among you dirt-ridden horses." At last, Wilfrid found the strength to speak up. "You off your buffers? We all have the same wheel arrangement, and 2 of us are the same bleeding class." "Behold a dash!" William scowled. "My name speaks volumes for my—" "Your name means balls! If your name did speak volumes, you wouldn't be such a bastard!" Despite having no fire at this time of night, Terry was feeling fiery, which was normally his cue to storm off to the goods shed. Instead, however, what he could storm off to was sleep. "We all know he's right," Wilfrid said bluntly, before following suit into slumber. With numbers 2 and 3 asleep, number 1 could only seethe in silence. "Those troglodytes will get theirs," he muttered. But William would be eating those words as soon as he spat them out. The next morning, William arranged his coaches with vengeance flying out of his funnel. Or so he thought. His train was the first, so despite bumping around the yard, nothing verbal came out of the livid loco. Edith, one of the coaches, tutted knowingly. "His valve gear's in a real twist this morning," she murmured to Julia, the brake coach. "No mistake about it, darling. And we'll be taking the brunt of it." Externally, William had calmed down when the passengers boarded the train, but internally, he was screaming for his safety valve. Soon enough, the guard's whistle blew and the train was on its way. "Lost my buffers, bastard," William growled. "I'll prove to those delinquents of their hubris." A few yards short of the station before the harbour is a girder bridge above the road. After that, the line travels on a hill where a particular section of track was often temperamental at best. Despite the railway's locomotives being especially lightweight, this still meant they had to take care. However, William, wrapped in his delusion and frustration, forgot this. The foreman, accompanied with a fag and coffee, was sat in his camping chair watching his men do their work. As he turned his attention to his coffee, the workmen's attention were focused on the distant beat of an engine approaching. William, snapping out of his trance, blasted his whistle and his drain-cocks hissed. He wasn't going fast, but that didn't stop him. "Move it, hoodlum!" he shouted with clenched eyes. But the engine's warning quite literally fell on deaf ears, and the foreman only noticed William's shadow getting larger in front of his, and by then, it was too late. Back at Crosby, Terry was shunting a coal train for Wilfrid when a tall, lean figure in a bowler hat and brown waistcoat walked up. "Morning, Mr. Squire."
said Terry, seeing the frown on the manager's face.
There's been an accident on the bed track. Take me down at once, please.
What are the casualties, sir? Asked the driver.
Don't know yet. But given it's William who's involved, I'll see to it that he's on the list.
Now, although Mr. Squire was a cruel figure when pushed to his limit, Terry couldn't help but chuckle to himself. He knew that William would get what he deserved. When they arrived at the scene, they saw a cross William sprawled on his side, the shabby works unit sitting a few feet away. Julia was undamaged and was able to be pulled clear. Edith had derailed, but thankfully hadn't gone over, with the workmen fashioning jacks under her wheels. Mr. Squire was livid, to say the least.
Your bloody name complex has gotten way out of hand, he fumed, and today has resulted in the death of David and my patients.
But you must understand, sir, William argued.
How does one not notice a steam locomotive approaching them? He was deaf, you ratbag!
Squire burst out.
He's not blind, though, William argued further, is he? No, but it's apparent that you are, rapped Squire. Then why on God's green earth did you name me after I shall see to it that you will cause no further animosity to our rails.
And so he did. Following the incident, Terry and Wilfred were shedded at the harbour with Treffy while William's punishment was underway.
I might honestly follow you home when he's sorted out, Treffy said. That Jarlax has had his comeuppance brewing for a long un.
What William's comeuppance would be, however, was the only thing up for discussion, and although none of the engines really cared for their number one, they were most curious as to what would become of him. They'd find out the following week as the three could finally return to Crosby. When they saw what was in the shed, they were flabbergasted. There was no sign of William, except for a grouchy smoke box fixed to the wall. Wilfred tried to hold himself together, but Terry and Treffy were in absolute hysterics.
So much for a shining pony,
cried Terry when he found his voice.
It's a sable pony, more like,
remarked Treffy, which broke William's composure.
You're practically vegetables, dirt-ridden horses.
William could only sulk and look away. He really had lost his buffers now. Off the leash. With William being fixed to the shed wall for a month, Terry was needed to take over the passenger services. Despite William's objections, Terry proved most capable at handling Edith and Julia, and to add salt to the wound, they preferred his company and got on swimmingly together. Unfortunately, however, Terry's pride would often get to his smoke box. He was usually very sensible and practically minded with his work, but ever since William's long-awaited disposition, Terry was glad to be proving his worth. In fact, he felt more like he was settling a score. One afternoon, Terry was waiting for Wilfred to clear the line. A wagon on his train had run a hotbox, and his crew were having a hard time to fix it. Tell you what, Will, said Terry, I don't think we need him back. Wilfred smiled. I agree, honestly. You do have the better mindset for the job. He trailed off, noticing the condescending grin on Terry's face. But, continued Wilfred, don't get too carried away. You don't want lightning to strike twice now, do you? Oh, come off it, scoffed Terry. I'm not a deluded arsewipe. I know my place on this railway has just been another engine with a number. I know you do, Terry, said Wilfred, but since taking the egg with William, you seem a tad, complacent. I ain't complacent, Will. I'm just glad the Dick's got his just dues. With a tapping hammer on Wilfred's bunker, it meant that the wagon was good to go. You've nothing to worry about, mate, Terry reassured, as Wilfred made his way to the points. Besides, it's too sunny for lightning. Wilfred smiled as Terry left Wellsworth. The grubby saddle tank knew that the coaches were in good buffers, in spite of his scepticism. Terry was more than happy on the last return journey. He got on well with the passengers, and the driver was given little to no grief. Terry even sang to himself as he coasted down the dusk-lit landscape. I'm smiling with glee and the line's at peace, smiling with glee and the line's at peace. They reached Crosby with 15 minutes to spare. The passengers said their thanks, and Terry wasted no time in shunting away the train, eager to get that extra shut-eye. When they crossed the points to the yard, Edith cracked a smile.
It should go without saying, really, but I hope you stay on passenger services when he has his wheels back.
Likewise, chuckled Terry, and I don't think he really deserves his wheels back. Julia's brow furrowed at hearing this.
Well, shouldn't he at least still be given work?
Terry blinked in surprise. Really? He said, puzzled. Even a vazy tow rag like him?
Vazy he may be, Terrier, but no engine deserves to be a mantelpiece.
Terry thought. Truth be told, no one on the railway were fond of William, with he and Terry being the worst of tempers. And while he got what he deserved, who was to say William would return to the same delusion the second he's back in steam?
Nothing will change,
he said at last, frustration in his voice.
Old habits die hard with engines like him. I've seen it many a time with the other two railways. No forethought, no tact. Engines with William's backbone just never learn. Well, you'll just have to play ball if he doesn't, said Edith simply. But I can't catch,
Terry said, perplexed. The coaches couldn't help but laugh.
I'm not wrong, am I? No, you're right to a degree, darling, Julia replied. But what Edith means is that you need to take things into a stride and go with the flow.
I'll meet you back at the yard office, Warren. All right, mate.
Although doubtful, Terry could only hum in agreement. With nothing else to add, he backed into the loco shed and fell, uncontentedly, to sleep. Edith's front right axle was slightly stiff from repairs, and her brakes would often lock, making it difficult to start. Normally, this defect was easy to fix, but this morning was biting cold, which froze her bearings solid. Unfortunately for Terry, he would find this out the hard way, as he was the only one awake at 7. His crew couldn't know either. It was early in the morning, and their priority was the bacon and egg breakfast on the fireman's shovel. After a good half an hour of scuttling back and forth, Terry had built enough steam to arrange his train.
I could get used to these early starts, you know, Warren,
whispered Terry confidently to his driver.
Oh, so will I.
The driver nodded, half a strip of bacon in his chop.
Don't get too confident, mind.
Terry couldn't help rolling his eyes. While he knew better than to let confidence override competence, he was getting slightly tired of being reminded not to repeat history. Nevertheless, he kept a level smoke box and a low noise level. Wilfred was a light sleeper in contrast to William, being the hardest to wake up for even his own trains. To the bewilderment of Terry, the snoring coaches wouldn't budge.
Oh, come on,
murmured Terry, wheels slipping in short bursts.
Bloody coaches,
the fireman grumbled and turned to climb down. But at that moment, Terry's wheels slipped vigorously again, throwing the fireman to the ground.
"Oh, steady on, lad!"
exclaimed the driver. "You almost had Horace." But Terry was too focused on getting the train to the platform, and before you could say coaches, Terry's front coupling hook was yanked away, and he shot backwards suddenly, derailing on the points. Soot spewed out of the engine's funnel and rained back down on him. That was enough to wake Wilfred. "What the blazes is going on?" he exclaimed, more surprised than angry. Terry said nothing. He was trying to process what just happened. The train was 15 minutes late by the time Wilfred was in steam, and Terry was blocking the points to the coaches. So to save what time they could, Terry's crew resorted to using the quartet of 4-plank wagons on the far right. Wilfred could only look on sympathetically as he departed. All Terry could do was stare at the empty slot in between his buffers. He had never felt more frustrated with himself. Later that afternoon, Terry's repairs were almost done. An engine from one of the other railways had brought him some parts from Crovan's Gate, and decided to stick around for a drink. "You're lucky them rods didn't snap in two," remarked the engine. Terry sighed. "Yeah, but at what cost, Mitchell? I was told not to let my pride get to me." "At least your fireman survived, and unlike that Willie, you weren't worked up over your name." "I mean," the other engine chuckled, "Walter, Neil and I all got named after the poor beggars who built us." Both engines chuckled in unison. Terry did at least stand by his words in that regard. As the driver clambered back onto his engine's footplate, they went on their merry way. The engine shot a hearty wink as he crossed the points.
Try not to let yourself off the leash again, laddie.
Terry scoffed cheekily in response. I wouldn't dream of it. Wilfred whistles. Today was a bizarre one for Wilfred. He had been startled by some sheep on the line, resulting in him blasting his whistle in two. Mr. Squire was surprisingly sympathetic on the matter.
While somewhat foolish, I can't say that this is your fault, Wilfred,
He said to his number 3 that morning.
However, we've no money for a replacement whistle. You're lucky William's out of action, for his whistle is... Absolutely not,
Spluttered William.
My distinguished whistle on that distasteful locomotive is not up for discussion. Would you rather it was 6 feet under, number 1?
Squire quipped with a snarky tone. Wilfred's laughter cut William's objections off.
Hey, don't worry, sir. I'll just have to improvise.
Mr. Squire was sceptical, and rightfully so, but given that Wilfred was the most sensible of the line, he did not question what the saddle tank meant.
Very well, so long as you know what you're doing.
He glared coldly to his left.
Unlike the dick and dog.
Terry looked away sheepishly as Mr. Squire twirled his cane and strode away. "The hell do you mean by improvise?" he asked, puzzled. "By way of music, lad," Wilfred replied simply, and winked. Of course, an engine can't run without a whistle, and Wilfred's way of music was an interesting one. Throughout the day, he would let out a cheerful with every station, board and crossing on the line. Onlooking passengers were bemused with the thought of a singing goods train leaving the platform, with some children even joining in. Out of everyone who had to witness Wilfred's tuneful toots, Station Master Jeffries was the most baffled by it all.
Isn't it exactly foolproof, is it, number 3?
He questioned Wilfred, pointing the token at him as if it were an interrogation. "Oh, I'm to whistle while you work now," said Wilfred innocently. "William wouldn't let me have his anyhow, and I'd be a fool to leave all the work to Terry."
No excuse.
The stuffy station master cut in.
When it comes to a busy harbour like Brendam, it's nothing but dangerous. What if a schooner cuts you off with their horn, or if a crane's creaking too loudly, or...
The driver snatched the token out of Jeffries' hand. "Good thing Treffy's there and not here, putting up with your shite then."
Now don't you get smart with it.
Jeffries could only splutter and choke in shock as Wilfred whooshed away cheekily. He told Treffy about it when they met at the harbour.
"I see where the old give face is coming from,"
Treffy admitted.
"but you only come and go here."
"Ah, true. But he don't half exaggerate a bit, don't he?"
"Well, this is the thing, Willie boy."
He then gave a sly snicker.
"I think I know how we can knock some sense into him." Basically,
The harbour shunter whispered his plan to Wilfred, who laughed.
"We'll do it tomorrow."
Wilfred was ready to go earlier than usual this morning, for he was eager to put that Jeffries in his place. The wagons were most inquisitive.
"Hey, how come you're up so early now, Willie boy?"
said the lead truck as they headed for Wellsworth. "Oh, I'm glad you asked," Wilfred replied quietly, and he explained the plan.
"Well, don't take Willie's approach for that."
"Oh, of course not. He'll be alive," continued the tank engine, with annoyed groans echoing down the train. "But what we had in mind was basically..." Down at Brendam, Jeffries was standing at the left end of the platform with a smouldered cigar hanging from his lips. He had the station dog on train watch and felt little need to do so himself. He frowned as the distant beat and clanking of Wilfred made its way into earshot. The crotchety station master marched over crossly. Then everything happened at once.
"Penny, penny, what?"
1 minute, Jeffries was on his feet. The next, he was knocked by the dog headfirst into the bushes. He was rambling like anything, but no one could hear him. And besides, Wilfred, his crew, and the rest of the train were laughing too loudly for him to be heard. When Jeffries finally found his footing and nearly choked on his muddy lunch, he stomped to his office in a fit of rage. "Early start was more than worth it," cackled the driver, struggling to muster up the words. The wagons could wipe their eyes if they had limbs, for there was more tears than sleepers between the rails. Mr. Squire didn't laugh to the same extent, and told Wilfred as much.
Regardless of how much we all despise Clayton, I'd expect more tact from you especially.
All due respect, sir, me and T get the most brunch off of him, Wilfred pointed out.
So this was a team effort then, hmm? Well, that doesn't surprise me. We'll have to pay for the damage in Clayton's office, and to cheer him up, I ought to have you up on his wall.
Squire paused.
However, I did at first find it funny, so I'll instead take you off goods duty for the next fortnight. Treffy shall take over until then. Good day.
He turned on his heel and walked to the station building. Wilfred sat in silence. Unbeknownst to him, William was looking over at his polluted colleague with a strange smirk on his face, as if to softly stifle a giggle. Much like number 1, number 3 wouldn't be whistling any time soon. Pre-grouping engines. Written and told by SRW, with inspiration from Master of the Lemons, The Buried Truck, Terrier 55 Stepney, and the Reverend Wilbert Audrey. Sound effects from YouTube, Edmund Ward, Chigley, BBC Sound Library, Roblox, Trains, GW Shunter, The German of Sodor, Chattel, and myself. With special thanks to Banteris Engines, The Buried Truck, Luke Ryan, and the Tallylin Railway Preservation Society. And thank you for listening.